This video is to support you with facilitating lessons 61 through 63 of the 5th grade Excel curriculum. This week, lessons focus on adding and subtracting decimals, and you end the week with an introduction to multiplying decimals. In the first lesson, you're going to really do a lot of work with adding decimals. In the first example, students are asked to find a sum of a typical decimal. In the model here it is really showing students that in order to add, they have to line up their decimal points. So it would be helpful if you modeled this problem and stress that they're lining up the decimal points. You also want to pay attention and really emphasize the need to use a 0 as a placeholder. Your students might believe that they don't need the 0. Really push them to use it because it's going to be helpful. And then you can follow the exemplar from here and model how to find the sum once they set the problem up correctly. So again, you want to focus on making sure they line up the decimal points and you look out for placeholders. You're going to repeat the same process in the second example, and then students are going to have an opportunity to try on their own. When students try on their own, they are again going to need to use placeholders, except for it's going to be in the second digit. So you just want to make sure that students are adding that additional 0. And then as students are practicing and you're lapping and providing them feedback, the good part about this practice is the problems are already set up for them. So there's no need to make sure that they're lining them up correctly in the first set of problems. You want to pay attention to them adding on the additional zeros. However, when they start on problem number 9, they should 1, use scratch paper, and 2, you want to pay attention to how they're setting up the problem, particularly if they're not getting answers correct. As you jump into lesson 62, students are still focused on adding and subtracting decimals. The exemplars here support you with subtracting. This is why adding on those placeholders is critical. So again, you want to make sure that they're lining up their decimal points. They have to use that 0 as a placeholder here, and then make sure they are subtracting from left to right, and you might have to model some borrowing for students. When they get to the try it problem and they're subtracting on their own, you want to first make sure they set up the problem correctly. And I might tell students, all I want you to do is set it up, do a quick lap, make sure the problem is set up correctly, and then allow them to solve. And then they're going to jump into a word problem. For this word problem, you want to make sure after you read the problem, you ask students how do they know they are supposed to subtract before you jump into modeling the subtraction. And as students solve it, they're using the exact same process they used in the last example. The additional step here is that we're going to remind students that we can use addition to check our answers. So you want to model that for students as well. As students jump into the practice is all word problems for this day. They're going to need scratch paper. There's no way for them to really solve the problems well using the margins, and you want to make sure they set up their scratch paper the same way they would do for A-net. We want to just get them in the habit of every time we use scratch paper, that's how we set it up. In the final lesson of the week, students are jumping into multiplying decimals. In the first example, students are using a model to help them multiply the decimal. So you just want to make sure you walk through the model correctly so that students can unpack how to connect the model to the problem that they are given. And then they are going to multiply using the standard algorithm. What you want to make sure you highlight here is that when we add and subtract, we line up decimals. When we multiply, we line up numbers. Make sure you highlight that difference for students. Once they line up the numbers, then they can proceed with multiplying. What is also going to be important for kids is that they identify where the decimal point needs to go. So they have to look in each digit and count the number of decimal places. In 1 and 34 hundredths, there are 2 decimal places. In the number 2, there are 0. So there needs to be 2 decimal places in the product. 2 plus 0 is 2. So you want to model for them. I have 268, and I need 2 decimal places. I start from the back and move 2. That's how we get 2 and 68 hundredths. As they jump into the next example, they are blending using models and multiplying vertically. Again, you want to make sure that students are lining up their numbers, not their decimal points, and that before they finalize their answer, they are counting decimal places. That is what you are going to focus on as students try out this problem. And in the practice, students are using the exact same skills that they have used in the examples. On your exemplar, it has been noted for you how many decimal places there should be. You might want to chunk the practice for students. Have them do questions 1 and 2, and then walk them through quickly, identifying the number of digits that should be, the number of decimals that they should have in their answer. That should be something quickly they can identify before they finish. And that's the big idea and what you want to focus on for this last lesson of the week.